Have you ever sat in a meeting or maybe even just a tense family dinner and felt completely outmaneuvered?
Yeah,
You weren't the loudest person, you didn't have the highest title, but you could just feel the ground shifting under your feet and you were the one sliding backward.
it's a universal feeling. It really is. It's that sinking realization that things are happening to you
Hmm.
rather than, you shaping them.
Right.
And the instinct for most of us, especially if we see ourselves as decent people, is to just opt out. We say, I'm not playing these political games. I'm just going to keep my head down, do my work, be neutral.
The "I'm just here to do a good job" defense. But today we're doing a deep dive into a text that says that is, well, suicidal strategy. We're looking at the 48 Laws of Power by Robert Greene.
Hmm.
And the core argument here is that you can't opt out. You can't just be a spectator in the game.
Exactly. The way these ideas frame it, every social and professional interaction is a kind of civilized war. And if you try to be neutral, you don't become safe.
You become a pawn,
You become a pawn for someone else who is playing the game.
which, I mean, that sounds incredibly cynical. It sounds like a manual for sociopaths.
It can be read that way, for sure, but I prefer to look at it as a handbook for prudence. It's really about awareness.
Okay.
You need to understand the mechanics of power, how people manipulate, how they get leverage, so you don't get crushed by it. It's about becoming a modern courtier.
Yeah.
On the surface, you're polite, you're civilized, but underneath, you are calculating.
So let's break down how this civilized war actually works. We're going to move through the guide logically, starting with the very foundation of power. And the first principle is probably the most famous one: never outshine the master.
This is the golden rule of any hierarchy. And it really stems from a simple psychological truth: insecurity.
Right.
Those in charge, they want to feel secure in their positions. They need to feel superior in intelligence, in charm, in everything.
Wait, if I'm too good at my job, that's actually a problem.
If you're visibly too good, yes. If you display too much talent, you might think you're impressing the boss. But what you're really doing is triggering their fear.
Uh-huh.
The text uses this incredible example of Nicolas Fouquet, the finance minister for Louis XIV. He was brilliant, wealthy, impeccable taste. And to honor the king, he threw this unbelievably lavish party.
He thought he was being a good employee. Like, look what I can do for you, sire.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But the king looked at this amazing party. He saw the applause Fouquet was getting, and he didn't feel pride. He felt dull by comparison.
No.
The very next day, he found an excuse to throw Fouquet in prison for the rest of his life.
That seems a little extreme.
It was necessary for the king's ego. Now, compare that to someone like Galileo. When he discovered the moons of Jupiter, he didn't just publish it to show how smart he was.
What did he do?
He named them after the Medicis, his patrons. He said the stars were a reflection of the Medicis' royal brilliance.
So he turned his own genius into a mirror that made them look good.
Precisely. He made the master appear more brilliant than they actually were. That is how you survive that first layer.
Okay, so you're managing the ego above you. But what about the people next to you? The guide moves on to friends and enemies. And honestly, this part made me a little uncomfortable. It says, never put too much trust in friends. Learn how to use enemies.
Yeah, it challenges that core assumption that friends are your safest allies in the professional world. The argument is that friends are just. They're much more prone to envy.
Why?
Because you're close, they feel entitled to favors. They can become spoiled and tyrannical if you hire them.
It calls this the jaws of ingratitude, which is a terrifying phrase.
But it's accurate, according to this perspective. The guide argues that an enemy, specifically a former enemy you've won over, is actually much more loyal.
Real?
They have something to prove. You know where you stand with an enemy. With a friend, the dynamic is just, it's murky.
So if we can't trust friends and we have to manage the boss's ego, how do we actually navigate day to day? This brings up the idea of concealing intentions.
This is all about being unreadable. If you telegraph your goals, people can get in your way. You need smoke screens.
The guide mentions Ninon de l'Enclos, a 17th century courtesan. How does she use this?
Oh, she was a master of misdirection. She would feign interest in one man just to hide her real interest in another. By the time the real target realized what was going on, it was too late. He was already hooked.
It's like a magic trick.
Or look at someone like Otto von Bismarck. In 1850, he gives this fiery speech supporting a cause he secretly hated,
Why would he do that? Just to confuse people.
to lull them into a false sense of security. He misled his opponents about his real loyalties, so they wouldn't see him as a threat until he was ready to make his move.
Because people trust appearances.
They do. If you say, I support this, They tend to believe you. You use that trust to hide your real game.
And sometimes I guess the best way to hide is to just stop talking. The next point is always say less than necessary.
The power of silence. It's a numbers game, really. The more you talk, the higher the probability you'll say something foolish.
Right.
Powerful people impress and intimidate by saying less. It forces other people to fill the silence, and in doing so, they often reveal their intentions.
All of this, the silence, the smoke screens, it all feeds into one thing: reputation. The text calls it the cornerstone of power.
Because reputation is about efficiency. If you have a reputation for being formidable, you can win without even having to fight. The advice here is pretty stark. Guard it with your life.
Because once it slips,
Whether it's for honesty or competence or strength, you're just vulnerable to attack from all sides.
okay, so that's the defensive foundation. But at some point, you have to actually do something, right? You need leverage. This
Yeah.
is where the guide shifts into how we court attention.
Right. And this seems to contradict the say less rule, but it's a bit different. This is about visibility. Court attention at all cost.
Being ignored is death.
Exactly. The example given is Pablo Picasso. And he didn't just paint pretty pictures to get attention.
No, he did the opposite.
When people started to accept his style, he'd paint something ugly, something disturbing. He broke expectations specifically to remain the topic of conversation. He knew it's better to be slandered than to be ignored.
That's risky, but I get the logic. Now, this next point is one I think everyone listening has felt in a corporate setting, and it always stings. Get others to do the work, but always take the credit.
Ugh, yes. It's the story of the explorer Balboa versus Pizarro. Balboa was the grinder. He did the work, he found the evidence of the Incan Empire, he hacked through the jungle.
He was obsessed with the doing.
Right, Pizarro was the strategist. He waited, let Balboa do all the heavy lifting, and then he just swept in to take the credit and the conquest.
That is essentially theft. It feels so unfair.
It is unfair. But this guide isn't concerned with fairness, it's concerned with power. Pizarro conserved his energy, and by taking the credit, he created this aura of godlike efficiency. He looked like he could achieve great things with very little effort.
I suppose if you're too busy arguing about who did what, you've already lost. Which leads right into the next rule. Win through your actions, never through argument.
This is all about protecting the other person's ego while still getting what you want. Arguments just create resentment.
And the story here is just brilliant. Michelangelo and the
Okay.
statue in Florence.
Yes. So the mayor, Soderini, walks in, a man who knows nothing about art, and says, the nose is too big.
A classic, terrible boss moment.
100%.
Yeah.
Now, Michelangelo could have argued. He could have lectured the mayor on perspective, but that would just insulted the guy's intelligence.
So what did he do?
He climbs up the scaffold, grabs his chisel, and he also secretly grabs a handful of marble dust. He pretends to tap away at the nose, letting the dust fall, but he doesn't actually change a thing.
No way.
He looks down and says, how is it now? And the mayor says, oh, it's perfect. You've made it come alive.
He won. He kept his artistic integrity, but he let the mayor feel like he was right.
Demonstrate, do not explicate. It's genius.
It's manipulation, but it's genius. So what about the people who just drag you down? The guide talks about infection.
Avoid the unhappy and unlucky. This is that idea of emotional contagion. Some people aren't just victims of bad luck. Their own behavior attracts misfortune.
And if you associate with them,
Their misery infects you. You can't save them, you only sink with them.
so cut them loose. On the flip side, you want people to be stuck to you. Learn to keep people dependent on you.
Independence is a myth in the world of power. To be safe, you have to be needed. Look at Bismarck again. He served the King of Prussia, but he structured his role so that the king literally could not function without him. He made himself the exclusive key to the king's success.
Job Security 101. Now here's a tactic that feels like a magic trick. Use selective honesty and generosity to disarm your victim.
The Trojan horse of honesty. We naturally assume if someone does one honest thing, they must be an honest person. You can exploit that. The story they tell us about Count Lustig, a con artist, and Al Capone,
The
very dangerous gangster. Lustig had scammed Capone into giving him money for a deal that didn't exist. But instead of running, which would have gotten him killed, Lustig went back to Capone and returned the money.
gave the money back.
He did. He calculated that Capone, who lives in this world of thieves, would be so shocked by an act of integrity that he'd lower his guard.
And it worked.
It worked. Capone trusted him, gave him a reward, considered him a friend. One calculated act of honesty covered up a dozen dishonest intentions.
That is a high-stakes gamble, but it brings up a good point about motivation. Usually, the guide says we should appeal to the opposite. When asking for help, appeal to self-interest, never to mercy or gratitude.
This is the mistake most of us make. We say, I helped you last year, you owe me. Or, please help me because I'm struggling. The text argues. People just don't care.
They're focused on their own problem.
Exactly. If you want help, you have to show them how helping you benefits them. Forget the past. Sell the future payoff.
Okay, let's shift to defense. Sometimes, despite all this maneuvering, you have an enemy, a real one. The guide is brutal here. Crush your enemy. Totally.
Yeah, this isn't about being mean. It's about not being naive. If you leave an enemy with even a dimly lit ember of power, they will recover. They'll harbor resentment, and they will come back for revenge.
So if you're going to fight, you have to finish it.
You have to remove their capacity to harm you completely.
But assuming we're not, destroying people, we still need to maintain respect. And the guide suggests using absence. Use absence to increase respect and honor.
Scarcity creates value. It's the Sir Lancelot effect. If you're always around, always available, your perceived value drops to become common. By withdrawing, sometimes you force people to talk about you, to wonder what you're doing.
You become more admired.
Right. But there's a fine line, because the next warning is against isolation. Do not build fortresses to protect yourself.
So withdrawal is a tactic, but isolation is a death sentence.
100%. If you cut yourself off to feel safe, you lose information. You lose touch. You have to circulate. The crowd is your shield, because that's where you get the intelligence to spot threats.
Okay, I want to talk about this one, the sucker tactic. Play a sucker to catch a sucker seem dumber than your mark.
This just weaponizes vanity. No one wants to feel stupid. Yeah. So if you act naive, if you make your opponent feel like the smartest person in the room, they get arrogant.
They drop their guard.
Totally. The con artist, Yellow Kid, Weil did this all the time. He'd act like a simpleton with these sophisticated financiers. They thought they were robbing him, so they didn't look too closely at the deal he was offering.
And then he'd clean them out. It's so effective. The same logic applies to surrender. Use the surrender tactic. Transform weakness into power.
Right. If you're weaker, never fight just for the sake of honor. Surrender.
That sounds cowardly.
It's strategic patience. By surrendering, you deny the winner the satisfaction of destroying you. You lull them into thinking they've won, but really, you're just buying time to recover and plan your next move. It infuriates them.
And while you're biding your time, you have to play the part. Play the perfect courtier.
Talleyrand's the master of this. He survived the French Revolution, Napoleon, the restoration of the monarchy regimes that executed everyone else.
Oh.
He knew how to flatter, how to yield, and crucially, he never brought bad news himself. He was the perfect mirror for whoever was in power.
So we've covered defense. Now let's talk about shaping reality. This is where it gets theatrical. Recreate yourself.
Don't accept the role society assigns you. Forge a new identity that commands attention. Think of Julius Caesar. He wasn't just a politician, he was a performer.
The purple robes, the dramatic speeches.
He knew the public wanted a show. Or George Sand, the writer. She created this powerful persona in a man's world by refusing to act like a traditional woman.
You control the narrative. And if you do it well, you can trigger the next law. Play on people's need to believe to create a cult-like following.
Humans have a desperate need to believe in something bigger. If you can tap into that, keep your promises vague but enthusiastic, prioritize emotion over logic, you can create a following that defends you irrationally.
But you have to sell it with confidence. Enter action with boldness.
Because hesitation is a hole that other people will exploit. The text compares it to lions circling prey. If the prey hesitates, the lions attack. If you act with boldness, it strikes fear. It creates a sense of inevitability.
But don't get so bold you forget the end of the plan. Plan all the way to the end.
Right. Don't let success intoxicate you. Most people plan for the start or maybe the middle. You need to visualize the ending and all the obstacles so you aren't surprised.
And while you're doing all this, you have to make it look like you're not even trying. Make your accomplishments seem effortless.
The Italians called this spezzatura, the art of concealing the art. Think of Harry Houdini. His escapes took immense strength and hours of tinkering. But on stage,
it was magic.
It was magic. Because if you show the sweat, it ruins the illusion. If you hide the effort, you appear to have a natural gift.
Now this next one is diabolical. Control the options. Get others to play with the cards you deal.
This is all about the illusion of choice. You let people choose, but you frame the options so that you win no matter what.
It's like with a toddler. You don't ask, do you want to put on your shoes? You ask, do you want to put on the red shoes or the blue shoes?
Perfect analogy. You're not offering no shoes. You're controlling the scope of their reality. Henry Kissinger did this with Nixon constantly. He'd present 3 policy options, but he'd write the descriptions so that the one he wanted was the only logical choice.
So Nixon felt like he was deciding, but Kissinger was holding the deck.
Exactly. And while you're doing that, you're also trying to find the other person's weak spot. Discover each man's thumbscrew.
Everyone has a weakness, an insecurity, a secret pleasure, a need for approval.
Find that thumbscrew, and you can apply pressure.
And through all of this, you have to carry yourself a certain way. Be royal in your own fashion.
Act like a king to be treated like one. Christopher Columbus came from nothing. But when he approached the Spanish court, he didn't beg. He demanded high titles, royalties. He acted with such dignity that they felt compelled to treat him as a peer.
It's a self-fulfilling prophecy.
It is.
We're in the home stretch now, mastering the game. Let's talk about mastering the art of timing.
Never seem in a hurry. Hurrying betrays a lack of control. You want to appear as if you're moving with the current of time, patiently waiting for the right moment.
And be careful who you follow. Avoid stepping into a great man's shoes.
If you follow a legend, you will always be in their shadow. Alexander the Great understood this. He openly disparaged his own father, Philip, who was a great king.
Why?
He had to distance himself to create his own legacy. You have to chart a new direction, or you'll just be the replacement.
And if you're dealing with a group that's against you, the guide says, strike the shepherd and the sheep will scatter.
Trouble is rarely unanimous. It usually traces back to one ringleader. So don't fight the whole group. Isolate the troublemaker. If you remove the shepherd, the group just loses its will to fight.
Now, Law 44. Disarm and infuriate with the mirror effect.
Psychological warfare. If you just mirror your enemy's actions, they can't figure out your strategy. It mocks them. It makes you completely unreadable.
But you can't be too good. This is a big one. Never appear too perfect.
This is so crucial. Envy is a silent killer. If you appear flawless, you make other people feel inadequate and they will hate you for it.
The text uses a strange little fable here about a merchant and a rat that ate the iron.
Right. It's an obscure story, but the lesson is about how envy leads to treachery. A merchant's friend stole his iron and claimed a rat ate it. It's ridiculous, right?
Yeah.
But he did it out of resentment for the merchant's wealth.
So the point is,
to avoid that kind of envious attack, you should occasionally display a defect. Admit to a harmless vice. Show that you're human and approachable. It deflects the evil eye of envy.
So don't get too successful. Do not go past the mark you aimed for. In victory, learn when to stop.
Napoleon said, the greatest danger occurs at the moment of victory. Success makes you arrogant. You think you can do anything. But if you overreach, you create new enemies. You have to know when to stop and consolidate your gains.
And finally, the ultimate law. Law 48. Assume formlessness.
This is the summation of everything. Be like water. If you take a rigid shape, if you have a predictable routine, a predictable strategy, you can be attacked.
The brontosaurus versus the chameleon.
Exactly. The brontosaurus was big and rigid and is now extinct. The chameleon changes. Never bet on stability.
Change is the only constant.
And if you have no visible form, no set pattern, you can't be pinned down. You adapt to whatever container you're in.
So we've just run through a crash course in manipulation, strategy, and survival. And I have to ask, isn't this all just exhausting?
It is. But it goes back to that paradox of the courtier we started with. We live in a world that demands we appear civilized and fair. But under the surface, human nature hasn't changed. It is a game of calculation. The point isn't that you should go out and manipulate everyone.
It's that if you ignore the game,
you risk being the pawn.
And that final thought on formlessness is really sticking with me. Because we're told so often to define our brand or stand for something.
But the true path to power might be the ability to shed those definitions, to adapt to whatever the situation requires. In a rigid world, the flexible are the ones who survive.
That is a lot to process. So here's my challenge to you listening right now. You don't have to go out and crush your enemies totally by lunchtime, but pick just one of these concepts. Maybe it's, say, less than necessary. Just try it in your next meeting. See what happens when you just stop filling the silence.
You might be surprised at how much power shifts in your direction just by waiting.
Thanks for diving deep with us. Keep your eyes open out there.